The Trumpet Daily is presented by Stephen Flurry. The program analyzes world news and history from a distinct perspective and compares current events to prophecies found in the Bible. The program also offers free educational publications, including the Trumpet News Magazine and books and booklets. The Trumpet Daily is produced at the Philadelphia Church of God's home campus in Edmond, Oklahoma, and its sister campus in Edstone, England. More information is available at thetrumpet.com.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
With the birth of Jesus, human history turned from night to day. But the story of Hanukkah reminds us that light will always prevail over darkness and faith and triumph over fear. Together, let us honor the eternal flame and the faith that has always protected the Jewish people. I've done so much for Israel that I have to read. Look at it, I got like pages. Within days of taking office, I signed a historic executive order to combat the vile scourge of anti-Semitism. As you know, there's tremendous unity now in the Middle East. We have legitimate peace in the Middle East. You know, you may have a little outbreak every once, but we have 59 countries all signed on. And we just settled another war today. You saw that with Rwanda and the Congo. Steve's a great deal maker, but I noticed one thing about him. He had the greatest personality. I have other guys that are great deal makers, but you have to go into World War III before the deal. We didn't want that. I said, everybody loves Steve. He's a great deal maker, but everybody loves him. And that's what turned out to be. People love Steve.
There you go. There's been a lot of speeches this week, a lot of talk about religion. Of course, we're at the end of the calendar year. People they're delving into Christmas, New Year's, all of the man-made holidays, and talk about peace, as we've noted so many times on this program. I think the statement that stands out so much there in that cold open, that there's tremendous unity in the Middle East. When I heard that, I thought about Erdogan when he refused to go to that discussion about ceasefires. If Bibi shows up, I'm not going. That was just a few weeks ago. Of course, we know what happened 2 years ago. Tremendous unity in the Middle East. That's the president's take on what's been happening these last couple years, or I guess more so what's happened in the last 11 months since he's been in office for his second term. You're listening to Stephen Flurry. This is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on today's show. You can get to the live video stream of this program at trumpetdaily.com or at thetrumpet.com or at the Rumble channel, rumble.com/Trumpet Daily. We'd love to hear from you. We've got an email address, td@thetrumpet.com, and also you should note, just a programming note, we'll have up-to-date live shows next week, and we're also planning for some special presentations for the week after that, and we're having our ministerial conference here on campus, but we've got the end-of-the-year montage, the mega montage, lots to look back on this momentous year. So much has happened. Just coming back to the tremendous unity. This is, again, and some context from one of the speeches. I think this is at the Hanukkah. You've got the Christmas celebrations. You've got the Hanukkah reception. Every religion's represented. So here's the one from Hanukkah, clip 7.
There's tremendous unity now in the Middle East. And we really do. We really have peace in the Middle East for the first time ever. So it's an honor.
There again, peace in the Middle East for the first time ever. And of course, he's renamed buildings with peace in the title. He sees himself as peacemaker, the capital T, the peacemaker. And I'll read to you a few verses a little bit later about how that God, it's only God that can make peace. You'll see that from the Psalms. Of course, we've noted Isaiah 9 before, verses 6 and 7. The Prince of Peace. And Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers. They're the children of God. It takes God's family to make peace. I'm sorry, again, the sincerity, I'm not questioning that. But the reality, they are not unified in the Middle East. They're not. They're divided. October 7 proved it. And he talked about signing, this anti-Semitism legislation upon coming into office this second time. And look at the Jew hatred that is spreading. This is another one from that same reception here again. The president congratulating himself over all that he's done for Israel, clip 8.
This is the first time that I've ever brought up notes to make a speech for. We call them the Christmas dinners. I call them the Christmas Hanukkah dinners, if that's okay. I hope you don't mind. But I call them New Year's dinners too. But I've made about 20 of them so far. I never had any others. I brought this up. You know why? I've done so much for Israel that I have to read. Look at it. I got like pages. And I don't want to leave anything out. I don't want to leave Golan Heights out. I want to tell you what we did.
Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's dinner. I mean, everybody's represented. It doesn't matter. He's there welcoming religion from all corners of the earth. I just want to refer you back to this December issue of the Trumpet magazine about the religious revival. Is it for real? Is there substance to it? Let me just read to you what my father said. This is the latest Trumpet. President Trump spoke at Charlie Kirk's memorial, but he didn't say much about religion. He spent his entire life relying on his own abilities. Even amid these terrible curses, this has not changed. It says, yet he also sees that people yearn for religion. That's why he gathers religious leaders all around him. And we've seen it all week. He gathers them around him. And my father, in this article, I'll go through more of it later, but he brings up important history about Jeroboam and how that he was the same way, the original Jeroboam, going through life, relying on his own abilities, but he understands and sees that people, they yearn for religion. So the Jeroboam of old created this religious system. It wasn't of God, it was of man. And he got the whole of Israel to follow after him, to look to him instead of looking to God. I mean, that's pretty amazing when you think about what's happening today in looking at the religious revival today. Listen to this from, again, the Hanukkah reception. This is clip number 5.
But the story of Hanukkah reminds us that light will always prevail over darkness and faith and triumph over fear. Together, let us honor the eternal flame and the faith that has always protected the Jewish people. You are protected. You are special, special people.
Here again, some nice comments aimed at the Jews. But the Jews were just attacked in Sydney. They were attacked on October 7. So they're special people. We've noted that on this program. God says some wonderful things about the Jewish people. In Romans 3, Romans 9, he used them to preserve the scriptures, the sacred calendar. Salvation is of the Jews, Jesus said to the Samaritan woman. It started with Jewish disciples. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus was the Lion of the tribe of Judah. All of that's true. But why would there be such vicious, hateful, violent attacks on Jews today? What is behind that? Who is behind that? If they're so special, and I mean, if light prevails over darkness, if God loves the Jewish people, if they're protected, as the president said there, why all these atrocities? Why the Holocaust? People should wake up and start asking some hard questions. The point about light, Hanukkah reminds us that light will always prevail over darkness. Now, it is true that Jesus Christ came into this world as a light. But what does John 1 and John 3 say about the way that this world received him? It says that they didn't receive him. They crucified him because they prefer darkness. They love darkness. Notice this from John 3, starting in verse 14. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. I mean, God wants to give us life in his family. But we have to believe. We have to believe in faith, living faith. And we have to follow in the steps of Christ. We have to aim for perfection. Matthew 5:48. But here in John 3, verse 16, the memory verse, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So it is true that Jesus Christ's arrival, his appearance in the first century, his ministry, I mean, it is going to impact the entire world. No doubt about it. But this present evil world rejected him. That's so obvious from the scriptures. So obvious. Verse 17, it says here, for God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believes on him is not condemned, but he that believes not is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God, the Son of God. And then it says in verse 19, this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. So in this case, light did not prevail. And this should open our minds to all kinds of hard questions. Why did the light not prevail? What does it say about God's purpose, God's plan? What does it say about human nature, the heart of man? And then you think about all these verses that speak of, the prince of this world, the god of this world, the prince of the power of the air, the deception that's set in over all the earth, the wickedness that covers the earth. Jesus comparing it to the time before the flood or Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the truth of the Bible. And, it's not even a negative message. If you understand the purpose and the plan of God, if you understand what's being worked out here below, light is about to prevail at the return of Jesus Christ. But look at what man has to go through in order to finally humble himself and to turn to the God of the Bible and all of his commanded observances and his 10 commandments, his holy law. Listen again to President Trump from the Hanukkah reception, clip 6.
For thousands of years, the miracle of Hanukkah has reminded us of God's love for the Jewish people, as well as their enduring resilience and faith in the face of centuries of persecution. Centuries. And it continues. It continues. Who would believe this could continue?
Here again, the contrast that we often note. And coming from the same speeches, there's tremendous unity in the Middle East, and yet, as you heard there, the persecution aimed at the Jewish people, centuries of persecution, and now all that's changed in the last 10 months. Now there's peace for the first time. Now there's tremendous unity. That's not the case. What we're seeing is how far man is willing to go to put complete, total trust in man and the things of man. You heard it there in the cold open. Everybody likes Steve. Everybody, he's got a wonderful personality. We've got other deal makers, but you've got to go through World War III first, and then the deal finally gets done. But with Steve, it's different because he's such a great personality, because people like him. He's helping bring peace. No, God is the one that will do that, and he will. It's one of God's names. And we shouldn't be so audacious and arrogant to take those names and to apply them to a man. Blessed are the peacemakers. Peace is something that you make with God's help, with God's direction, with God's inspiration. Again, you see running through a lot of these statements, and it's not even just President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, just talking about the miracles that human beings have performed. Not enough attention goes to God, or credit is given to God. Listen to this recently from Bibi, clip 20.
And in that struggle, first and foremost, we saved our people. But we also fought the battle of the people of culture, the people of light against the people of darkness. We win, you win. We truly win with divine heroism. That is how miracles are made. You mentioned our great friend, President Trump. President Trump asked me, how do you do it? You're so small. They are so many, the country is so small, and your neighbors are so big. Where does this strength come from? Does it come from the heritage of Israel? Does it come from our faith? Does it come from our understanding that we will not let anyone sever the lifeline of the people of Israel? And this is something tremendous and mighty, and it overcomes everything. You are performing miracles in our days at this time, just as in those days. And I profoundly salute you all here by the ancient and sacred Western Wall, where our valiant heroes, the Maccabees, courageously dedicated the Holy Temple, a truly momentous event in our history.
I believe he's addressing the military, or at least some higher-ups. You're performing miracles. President Trump said Hanukkah is a miracle. He referred to the Christmas miracle. I think this is clip 3. Play that one.
So as we prepare to celebrate the miracle of Christmas, we thank God for his many blessings, and together we rejoice at the true source of greatness, happiness, and strength. The good news is that glorious nights 2,000 years ago, think of it, 2,000 years ago, it was indeed a glorious night.
And there are a lot of miracles associated with the birth of Christ. We go through them in the Life and Teachings class. But there's also a lot of pagan traditions that man has inserted into the so-called birthday of Jesus. It didn't happen in December, obviously. It's more like early fall, but we can get into that, I suppose, at another time. Maybe next week would be a good time. The Christmas miracle, the Hanukkah miracle, the miracle of the IDF, the miracle of peacemaking in the Middle East, tremendous unity. And then, as I say, the contrast is always put on the platform as well by the same speakers. This was President Trump switching back to the Hanukkah reception, clip number 9.
So we have to be, Sid, we have to be very careful, because bad things are happening. And then you see what goes on in Australia, or October 7th. How about October 7th? And then you have people that deny it ever happened. How about the people that deny, like they deny the Holocaust, but, you figure, well, that's just many years. Well, October 7th is not many years at all. But you have to be very, very careful. Bad things are happening, and we're not going to let that happen. While I'm president, and the DOJ and Harmeet, we're not going to let it happen. But please be vigilant and careful, because you have some bad people that are now in Congress that were unthinkable to be in Congress 12, 13, 14 years ago, 15 years ago.
Unthinkable that Ilhan Omar and others like her are in Congress. The unthinkable happened on October 7th, the scourge of anti-Semitism. But a lot of bad things happening, but we're not going to let it happen. This is the reference he made to that executive order on anti-Semitism, clip 10.
Within days of taking office, I signed a historic executive order to combat the vile scourge of anti-Semitism, as you know. It's the strongest executive order of its kind ever signed.
The strongest executive order. Keep in mind, it's a sheet of paper with words on it. And then look around and see what's happening. Look at what happened in Sydney 6 days ago. 5 days ago. Look at what happened 2 years ago. Look at the marches in New York, in London, in Paris, all across the West. Radical Islam is on the march. Jew hatred, I mean, that's in half of MAGA at the moment. This is a world in darkness. John 3, verse 19 proves it. I just read it to you. Men love darkness because our deeds are evil. The sin question never comes up. Religion comes up. Christmas, Hanukkah, all of them. All the traditions, all the holidays, the different denominations, they're all represented. And it's exactly the way the devil would want it. It's a Babylon of religious confusion. And Herbert Armstrong taught us so much about this many years ago when he talked about God raising him up to be a voice crying out in the wilderness of religious confusion. That's in Isaiah 40. It's also referenced in the Gospels. But here's a Jeroboam administration that really puts a lot of faith and trust in its own abilities. And yet, as my father says in this Trumpet magazine, he knows that people yearn for religion. And so he's spearheading the religious revival. And as my father says in this article, this is going to lead to the fulfillment of a critical prophecy in Amos 7 that I have explained for years. President Trump was prophesied to lead a religious resurgence, but instead of leading people to God, he's causing them to look to him. And you can see that in these sound bites. You can see that in these quotes. You can see it in the executive orders. You can see it in the diplomats and their efforts to make peace. I mentioned yesterday on the program, well, this week, I mean, we've talked about just the diametrically opposite mindsets that you see in America and in Europe. But we also talked yesterday on the show about all of the distractions that are there to take our eyes off of what's really important. On Monday or maybe Tuesday, we'll get into it, but Sam mentioned, the producer for this show, mentioned that in the Atlantic, that article, remember, that we talked about, we're going to mention it again on the Key of David this weekend, the new German war machine. And you look on the cover of the Atlantic, the print version, and it's got RFK and all of these dangerous things that he's doing. And there you can see the little inset. We've blown it up for you. But also, or plus, we've got the return of the German army. And then you look at all the pictures in that article. It looks so nice. There's a nice jet in one of the graphics. Yeah, it's great. It's great. RFK, though, I mean, he might do too many pull-ups, you see. But the German army, the new German military machine, we'll go ahead and put a headline on the cover, pretty small, but nevertheless, we just want to inform the general public. But these pictures, they tell you everything you need to know. And it shows how unique and different God's work is. It's sounding the alarm. It's crying aloud. Isaiah 58:1. Cry aloud, spare not. We'll get into that more next week, because there's another story spiked online about Germany. You know, it's going to push back against Islam. Radical Islam. They're already being applauded for building a German war machine. And pretty soon, Germany's going to be the one that takes the lead and says, enough of this radical infiltration of our countries in Europe. And then you can be sure America, Britain, everybody's going to be applauding. Well, finally, we've shown some strength. The stage is being set for so many prophecies to be fulfilled. And this one in Amos 7 is certainly one of them. You see what makes God's church so different and unique. He gets into, my father does, he gets into some of the history. And I'll just go through this quickly. It's important, though, because you see so many obvious parallels to what's happening today. It says, after Jeroboam, the first, received rulership of the 10 northern tribes of Israel, what did he do? He feared that the people would return to the house of David, so he built an alternative center of worship. You can read about this in 1 Kings 12. It says they had just broken away, and he wanted to keep them separate from King David's throne. God had explained to Jeroboam the importance of the house of David, but he rejected God's instruction. So here was this very religious individual who rejected God's instruction, God's direction. He said, no, thank you. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to create my own system. I want to make sure everybody's looking to me. It says King Jeroboam feared that the people would look to God instead of him. He feared that. He knew that people yearned for religion. So he created this false religious system. It happens. It's recorded in the Bible. Jeroboam then polluted the priesthood by ordaining priests from the lowest of the people that were not sons of Levi. He changed the dates of God's sacred holy days and what they were under David and in Jerusalem. He just went in there and changed the dates, changed the observance. Is that okay? Can a man do that? I mean, it's like I said on the Sabbath program with Charlie Kirk. That's another subject we want to get into next week. Charlie Kirk's book on the Sabbath. But who made it? And who are we to say, in some cases there's exceptions, obviously, because, we get busy or we have a prior engagement or we have to take a trip to such and such. If God thought that way, well, there's exceptions to every rule, then the 10 Commandments would go on and on and on for about 1,000 pages. Instead, you can find it on one page in most Bibles, Exodus 20. Read it. In fact, the most detail we get on any of those commandments is on the Sabbath. And it's just a few verses, but it's so clear. This is what you're to do. This is what you're not to do. Here's how you observe it. Here's how you keep it holy. Then, of course, man comes along and says, well, I kind of like some of the principles here, but I'll just manipulate it and twist it around a little bit, and then it'll be perfect for me. Then it'll be perfectly suited for me. That's not the way it works with God's law. Now, we are free moral agents. God says you have to choose this. You have to embrace this. But he says, this is the command. Now, are you going to observe it? Are you going to keep it? Or are you going to disobey? Well, man's history has been disobedience and rebellion. Man prefers darkness because his deeds are evil. My father writes, Jeroboam rigged the system so he could lead the people and keep them away from the house of David, and also keep them away from true religion. It says you can study the lives of virtually any popular religious leader and find a lot of immorality and false doctrine. God has a warning against the religious people of our day. It's not enough to reject transgenderism and other societal evils. God is telling us there's something terribly wrong with our religion. There's something wrong with it. And if you listen to, all of the preachers today, particularly the ones that are on board with MAGA, they're basically out there saying that there's nothing wrong with religion. It's never been better. What does God say? It's kind of like the light and darkness thing. It's interesting. I mean, you've got President Trump talking about light and darkness. Bibi, Prime Minister Netanyahu, same thing, light, darkness. They're talking about miracles. They're talking about Hanukkah, Christmas, religion, revival. God loves us. We're protected. We're safe. But then you step back and you look at this world. Are we safe? Are we protected? Yes, God loves us. But does God express love through correction? Or with a rod? A spanking instrument? You can read about that in Isaiah 10. God does punish in love to try to get us back on track, to try to get our attention, to help us turn our hearts to Him. We had an article earlier this year, How Genuine is America's Religious Resurgence? That's from May, I think it was, May 15th. And then yesterday, just to follow on the distraction point, Navigating Our Fake World, that's the March 2023 Trumpet, where it says, we've considered just a handful of areas plagued by deceit and fakery. We don't explore our financial system and currencies, which are propped up by central banks and confidence. We don't consider our economies, which seem stable but are propped up by consumer spending. I mean, I think the federal debt now is 39 trillion. And it's just skyrocketed under Biden, under Trump, under Bush, Obama. It doesn't matter who's in there. And then we talk about prosperity. We talk about peace. We talk about safety. We talk about God. We talk about religion. In today's world, no nation, people, age, race, or sex is immune. Politics, government, media, economics, education, fashion, entertainment. It says there's an element of phoniness in them all. And you can add religion to the list. I played that clip from Eric Erickson yesterday. All these evangelicals that surround the president and praise him and pat him on the back, and yet don't tell him the truth of the Bible, the truth about repentance and change, the truth about the gospel. The ambassadors of peace, I mean, they are on the march. Even as October 7th happen here and there and everywhere. Listen to President Trump again from the Hanukkah reception, clip 11.
And by the way, how good is Steve Witkoff doing, right? You know, I got Steve involved in Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East. Bottom line, we have legitimate peace in the Middle East. You know, you may have a little outbreak every once, but we have 59 countries all signed on. They'll do whatever is necessary. And Hamas, say what you want. Hamas, you know, we got back all of the hostages and all of the dead, young, beautiful people that were dead. And nobody thought that would happen. In fact, I even said the toughest are going to be that final 20. We're never going to get them. But we played very tough, and we were very tough. We meant it. But Steve's a great deal maker, but I noticed one thing about him. He had the greatest personality. He was a real estate guy in New York. He knew less about rivers and meets and bounds in Russia and the various places he's working on. He knew nothing about it. But I recognized for 20 years, I've been dealing with everybody in New York. I said, Steve has the best personality. I have other guys that are great deal makers, but you have to go into World War III before the deal. We didn't want that. I said, everybody loves Steve. He's a great deal maker, but everybody loves him. And that's what turned out to be. People love Steve.
That passage in the Psalms, again, I mentioned Isaiah 9, 6 and 7, but Psalm 46, notice this passage. It says in verse 8, come behold the works of the Eternal, what desolations he has made in the earth. Verse 9, he makes wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaks the bow or the bow and cuts the spear in sunder. He burns the chariot in the fire. Be still, it says, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Stop and think. Think on this. God is the one who makes peace. We have to do it God's way. God says about man, Isaiah 59:8, he doesn't know the way to peace. He won't go God's way. He won't follow Christ's steps. If we're going to talk about Christ, well, let's talk about his message, his gospel. And let's talk about the fact, just to take the Jews as an example, I mean, they rejected the message that John the Baptist came with in preparation for Christ. Then they rejected Jesus Christ's message, the true gospel. Then you had all the Roman authorities. They were on board with it too. Let's persecute and crucify Christ. Men love darkness because our deeds are evil. That's why this world needs a witness, a warning. It needs a prophetic message about what's coming, about the solution to all the problems of this world, the evils that we see in this world. I mentioned, I didn't get around to this yesterday, but we played it on a Key of David program that we recorded. And I hope to get through to Ezekiel 33 and some other passages here in the weeks ahead about what God's work is commissioned to do. I mean, it says if you see the sword coming, here's all this discussion about peace and miracles and God's love and our safety and protection and prosperity. And you've got the Germans, you've got Germany building a war machine, preparing for war. As I covered earlier this week, you've got leaders in Europe saying, get ready for war. And that's what they're doing in the Middle East. It's what they're doing all over the world. They're preparing for war. There is not tremendous unity. There's momentary moments that the firing stops. But then you just get, both sides just are reloading their weapons. And then the firing begins. That's been the history. In 1932, Churchill at that time, he's in the wilderness. I mean, we're only, 15 years or so removed from the worst war this world had ever seen, World War I. And the West was just like, well, I think Germany should be able to rearm. That's okay. We're fine with this. I mean, today, at least, there's 80 years that have gone by, and everybody's fine with it, as happened in the 1930s. But this was Churchill's warning. We put this together with the help of an AI voice, clip 12.
Now the demand is that Germany should be allowed to rearm. Do not delude yourselves. Do not let His Majesty's government believe. I am sure they do not believe that all that Germany is asking for is equal status. I believe the refined term now is equal qualitative status, or as an alternative, equal quantitative status by indefinitely deferred stages. That is not what Germany is seeking. All these bands of sturdy Teutonic youths marching through the streets and roads of Germany with the light of desire in their eyes to suffer for their fatherland are not looking for status. They are looking for weapons, and when they have the weapons, believe me, they will then ask for the return of lost territories and lost colonies.
When they have the weapons, basically he's saying they're going to use them. And they did. And they did. The race was on in Germany. Just like you're reading today. Go back and look at the Trumpet Daily from Tuesday and Wednesday. Important programs. And all these commentators saying Germany is racing. They're racing to build the war machine. They're sending weapons all over the earth. Exporting weapons. Weapons of war. And no one seems bothered by it. You can see why the devil's trying to blot out this history and treat it, like I said yesterday or day before, treat it like, well, it's ancient history. Could never happen again. And then you've got all these very modern commentators now saying that, well, you know, Hitler was kind of cool. And I think maybe Churchill was the bad guy. I mean, listen to him there. He's a warmonger. He's just trying to stir up strife. No, he gave the only accurate forecast of that time. Well, him and Herbert Armstrong, they were preaching at the same time. Mr. Armstrong giving you God's perspective, and Churchill fulfilling a prophecy at the first few verses of Ezekiel 33. They had a discussion at Hillsdale about Churchill and his place in history, and just the war on history today, the war to revise history today. This is clip 16.
As I mentioned at the beginning, you are his, as he were, co-biographer. You invested many years of your life, a real and extraordinary labor to create that project with Sir Martin Gilbert and indeed Churchill's son right at the very beginning. I think you wrote the first volume before he died. Churchill feels like this figure who's ever old and ever new. Everybody's always talking about him. Everybody's always quoting him. And, you know, I remember 10 years ago, roughly, I think there was a poll here in Britain where he comfortably won the kind of greatest Briton of all time award. And yet, in recent years, you know, we've seen on the British left the emergence of this kind of aggressive revisionism, his wonderful statue on Parliament Square being defaced with the word racist during the summer of Floyd, extremely, you know, skeptical, polemical conferences being held at Churchill College, Cambridge. He's got caught up in the Empire Wars because of the views he is alleged to have had about British India, and so on and so forth. But then more recently also in America, on the American right, these sort of podcast historians popping up. I'm thinking of Darryl Cooper, who's known as Martyr Made, I think is his podcast. I haven't listened to much of him, who is making arguments that actually Churchill is not the hero that we should be thinking of him as. He's a sort of, there's a kind of complicity there in starting the Second World War, certainly in getting America involved when it didn't really need to be involved.
Darryl Cooper, you know, Fuentes, even Tucker Carlson. It really is. I mean, you talk about the unthinkable of just 5-10 years ago. Look at the way the devil is blotting out history and turning villains into heroes and heroes into villains. Here's a bit more from the same exchange. This is clip 17.
These things are just not true, right? It said that Churchill wanted the war. In fact, he worked against it from his first big speech in Parliament in 1901. He warned that a European war will be a tragedy, win or lose. And he always professed himself against it. He proved that in part later, because he was always looking for a way to get it over with if he got into one, looking for a way to be strong enough to prevent them in the beginning. He won his glory in the Second World War, but his title for it, which he used consistently in writing too, this is the unnecessary war. If we'd done what we should, we would have never got into it. And he predicted that it would cost Britain its greatness.
As far as the politics of it, he was a prophet. I mean, he got the predictions right. You show some strength. You make sure you don't let Germany rearm in the 1930s, and it's a completely unnecessary war, as Churchill said. They quote Churchill again in this next clip. Notice this, clip 18.
Churchill wrote to Lord Beaverbrook, a friend of his, and like many of his friends, they had plenty of controversy, and they loved each other, and abidingly, the love. And Beaverbrook wrote a book about the First World War, and Churchill wrote him a letter about how beautiful it was, and it ends with, unteachable from infancy to tomb. That is the story of mankind.
That's right, too. Unteachable. We just won't let God teach us. We don't have a childlike attitude. There's too much vanity, too much arrogance. We want to go our own way. And then we delude ourselves with smooth-sounding words. Read Isaiah 30 sometime, or 2 Timothy 4. Paul or the prophet Isaiah, they talk about how that in these last days, the spirit of the age, people are going to want smooth-sounding words. They're going to want a nice message. They certainly don't want a Churchillian message. That's why they're revising the history. They don't want an alarm going off that an explosion is coming. They just want to hear about peace and prosperity, safety, comfort, protection, love. Victor Davis Hanson, another historian, he writes, "Can the dark ages return?" And in this article, he takes you through this sweeping look at history, and he talks about how that following the great empires of old, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, these are empires that are talked about in Bible prophecy, in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. Great empires that ruled the earth. Well, after they collapsed, dark ages set in. And what Victor Davis Hanson discusses in his article is, could that happen again? There's many people that think, no, it's impossible. We're too modern and sophisticated. Contemporary Americans do not believe that our current civilization could self-destruct. In the West, followed by an impoverished and brutal dark age. But what caused these prior returns to tribalism and loss of science, technology, and the rule of law? What caused it? Historians cite several causes of societal collapse, and today they are hauntingly familiar. In other words, history is repeating itself. It says here, like people, societies age, complacency sets in. The hard work and sacrifice that built the West also creates wealth and leisure. As I was saying yesterday on the show, you look at some of these great videos the government's producing on America's own history, and there's a message in that. There's correction in that. If we're childlike, if we're teachable, but are we? Are we teachable enough to be corrected by our own history or by this history? He talks about expenditures and consumption when they outpace income, production, and investment. In other words, just going into unbelievable amounts of debt, deficit spending. He says the age-old bane of anti-Semitism reappears, mass migrations unchecked, borders disappear, the currency inflates, general crassness in behavior, speech, dress, and ethics replaces prior norms. Did any of this sound familiar? Or does it look like what we're seeing today? Of course it does. This was, I think, on a podcast. This is a Dutch historian. His name is Rutger Bregman. He's talking about, again, history, important history. He's talking about America, Western nations going the way of Rome, clip 19.
When the great historian Edward Gibbon described the decline of Rome, he didn't speak in vague abstractions. He gave us names, dates, and details, page after page of cowardice and corruption. Reading the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is like watching a civilization rot in slow motion. Sadistic emperors and gilded thrones, generals who sold out their own armies, and senators who cared more for spectacle than statecraft. And yet, what shocks you most when you read Gibbon today isn't the depravity, it's the familiarity. Gibbon wrote about politicians who lacked seriousness, elites who lacked virtue, and societies that mistook decadence for progress. 2,000 years later, we live in an age where billionaires dodge their taxes, politicians perform instead of govern, and media barons profit from lies and hatred. The Roman elite fiddled while Rome burned. Our elites live stream the fire and monetize the smoke. Immorality and and seriousness. Those are the two defining traits of today's leaders.
That's makes me think of the special trumpet issue we had some years ago, going the way of Rome. I mean, Herbert Armstrong wrote about this decades ago. Mistaking decadence for progress. That's where we are. It happened to Rome, but yet people think, you know, it's never going to happen to America. It can't happen to Britain. Can the Dark Ages return? Listen to this little bit. This is from I don't know who this guy is, but he's from, it was a TED Talk, I believe it was. Are we heading toward World War III? It's a political scientist, clip 14.
History has taught us many lessons, and we should pay attention to its signs, because we might be heading towards World War III. One way to understand today's events is to look for clues from the past.
But who does this today? As I said yesterday, we treat World War II history as if it's ancient history and there's nothing to learn from it. Well, at least there's a few voices. We find a few on this program and try to make those available to you. Voices that are, well, following what Churchill wrote to Lord Beaverbrook, unteachable from infancy to tomb. Jesus Christ came as a light to this world to teach a few disciples, just a handful, who were willing to humble themselves, to look to Christ, to build a teachable attitude with God's help, and to follow in the steps of Jesus Christ. I mean, even Christ, it talks about him in the book of Hebrews, learning and growing. Even though he was perfect, he never sinned. You talk about a teachable attitude. He said, I can't of my own self do nothing. That's a very different mindset and spirit compared to what we see today coming from human leaders that are so sure of themselves, that are so convinced they know the way, that they can get by on personality or talent or abilities, human abilities. It says in Zechariah 4, not by human might nor power, but by God's Spirit. God's Spirit is the spirit of humility. It's God's Spirit that gives us a teachable mindset. And God wants to teach us. But do we want to learn? Do we want to receive it from God? Or are we going to look to some man instead? I want to leave a few minutes for this week's installment of WorldWatch. It might take you a little bit over, but we won't charge you for any of those extra seconds. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Thanks for joining us on today's show. Thanks for joining us all week, and we'll see you next week.
José Antonio Cast was declared the winner of Chile's presidential election on December 14th. Cast won 58% in the runoff election against a leftist candidate and will replace incumbent Gabriel Boric on March 11th. Under Boric, Chile has absorbed a large influx of Venezuelan migrants and experienced a surge in violent crimes. Cast himself is a son of an immigrant. His father came to South America after World War II, from Germany, where he was a Nazi party member and officer in Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht. Cast's victory reflects a surge in the political right across Latin America. His election may be just what Chile needed to enter a closer cooperation with Catholic Europe. The October 1957 Plain Truth, predecessor to the Trumpet, stated, Latin American nations will join in with the European revival of the old Roman Empire. This forecast was based on Latin America's religious and cultural ties with Europe and the prophesied siege of the U.S., in which Latin America will play a crucial role. To learn more, read Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry's article, America is Being Besieged Economically. Children in Australia can no longer access social media, as the world's first nationwide ban came into force December 10th. Hundreds of thousands of accounts have been deactivated, and platforms that fail to take reasonable steps to exclude users under age 16 risk fines of up to $33 million per breach. Australian adults now must prove they are over 16 to access some of the most commonly used news and discussion forums. They can do this by uploading copies of their passport or driver's license, or by taking photos or videos, which are analyzed by artificial intelligence. To minimize the burden of verification, apps will also try to determine a person's age by studying their behavior. But with millions of people each interacting online thousands of times, this demands a lot of surveillance, even censorship. Australia is also leading the world in the creation of a digital ID system. It embraced some of the world's most draconian restrictions on free speech and everyday life during COVID. Many Australians suspect their government is using the good cause of protecting teens from the dangers of social media to set up the infrastructure necessary to spy on what all of its citizens do and say online. To learn how nations around the world are cracking down on what you can say online, read The Global War on Free Speech. An Islamic State gunman killed 2 United States servicemen and an American interpreter on December 13th, the first U.S. fatalities in Syria since the fall of the Assad regime last year. The shooting, which also injured 2 soldiers with the U.S.-allied Kurdish group Syrian Democratic Forces, occurred near Palmyra, where U.S. officers were meeting with Syrian officials. The U.S. military reported the attack as an ambush by a lone ISIS gunman in Syria, who was engaged and killed. The Syrian government condemned the attack but acknowledged that the terrorist had been affiliated with its security forces. Syria's current government, led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, largely developed out of an al-Qaeda affiliate. It recently integrated many foreign jihadist fighters into its security forces with U.S. approval. The gunman's connection to the government highlights the fact that some, perhaps many, in Sharaa's government remain radical jihadists. Despite the Trump administration's outreach to the Syrian regime, many still want holy war against America. To learn more, read A Terrorist in the White House. To learn more about current world news and how it relates to Bible prophecy, please visit thetrumpet.com.